So I want to welcome everyone. To our very special program tonight with Geraldine Brooks and her new novel, Horse. We're very excited about this. And my name is Raymond Lotta. I am a political economist. I am a spokesperson for Revolution Books, and I'm a follower of the revolutionary leader, Bob Avakian, and an advocate for the new communism that he has brought forward. I see some new faces here tonight, and I see some familiar faces, and a warm welcome to all of you. And it's going to be a very, very stimulating program because this book is really phenomenal. Let me tell you, if you haven't read it, we're going to get into it. You're here at Revolution Books. This is a unique bookstore. It's a beacon for a whole new world. It's a place where you come to find the books. The author programs the discussion and the debate and the agonizing over why the world is the horror that it is and how it can be transformed, radically transformed, through a revolution to overthrow this system and bring a society and world into being in which human beings can truly flourish. And this is a place where the search for the truth and critical thinking meet the poetic spirit. There's no revolution without the imagination. And the world we want to bring into being is a world in which we can give full expression to beauty and to the artistic and creative impulse. And that's why we relish the opportunity to engage with a book like Horse. And the beating heart of this bookstore is the work and leadership of Bob Avakian, who is the most important political thinker and leader in the world today, who has developed a whole new framework for human emancipation, and the vision and the strategy and the approach to making a truly liberating revolution in these times. So I want to invite everyone here to join in the program tonight, to stay behind, to browse the bookshelves, to talk with the staff about the store, make a contribution to this bookstore, the political, intellectual, and cultural center of a movement for an actual revolution, and to contribute your ideas and your energy, because this bookstore is more needed, more vital in these tumultuous and dangerous times, out of which it is actually possible, if we go to work on it, to wrench something radically different and far better, a whole new world. So please, stick around and learn more about this bookstore. We're going to go to our program now with Geraldine. And Geraldine Brooks has written several novels, including Caleb's Crossing and People of the Book. And her novel, March, won the 2006 Pulitzer Prize. And Geraldine also started as a journalist. She wrote for the Wall Street Journal and reported from Bosnia, Somalia, the Middle East. She has a lot of experience under her belt and a lot of insights about the world and history, and all this finds remarkable expression in her works of fiction. So we're very honored to have Geraldine with us tonight. And our format is going to be, first, we're going to remove this podium from the stage. And then Geraldine and I will be in conversation, and she's going to do some reading some passages and some excerpts from this book, Horse. And then we're going to open it to you for your questions and your observations. And then you'll be able to stick around afterward to kind of hang out with Geraldine for a bit. We'll see how much time she has. And get the book up at the counter and get it autographed by Geraldine. So that's our program tonight. We'll be in conversation. I want people to know that Connie Julian, who's a member of our staff, she's in the audience, and she's an aficionado of Geraldine's works, and she's going to be, offering some insights and some questions, as will all of you, or some of you. But we call on all of you to take part in this, even if it means attentive listening. A warm round of applause for Geraldine.
Good day.
That's some additional biographical information. A little cute. Okay, Geraldine, the title of the book, Horse. And can I see a show of hands? Who's read the book?
Okay, that
What do you
helps.
think? That's
Okay.
pretty-
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to start with the title and what's packed into this. So maybe you can tell us something about horses and horse racing and pre-Civil War America, pre-industrial America, and in particular the role of the Black Horseman, in this. Yeah.
Okay, only a few things to cover there. I probably should start by explaining why I chose this as a topic to write about. And it evolved out of the inconvenient fact that I became horse crazy in my 50s. And I do not recommend this. If you're going to become horse crazy, do it when you're 5 or when you're 15, when you can still bounce when you fall off. But that isn't how it went for me. And, to cut a long story short, I found myself with my first horse, and I became ridiculously engaged by the care of this animal and learning to ride, and I wasn't actually getting any work done. And so it was fortuitous that I happened to go to a museum event at the Plymouth Pawtuxet Museum. And at the same event was a gentleman from the Smithsonian who was regaling his conversational partners with the story of how he had just delivered the skeleton of what he described as the greatest racehorse in 19th century America. And the skeleton had been lost and neglected in the attic of the Natural History Museum until some racing historians in Lexington, Kentucky had asked for the loan of this skeleton. So he had just transported the skeleton of the racehorse from this dusty attic to the centerpiece of an exhibition on the history of the thoroughbred. But it was when he got to the part of the horse's story that wasn't about the racing triumphs, wasn't about the celebrity of the horse, but was about what happened to the horse during the Civil War, that I became really transfixed and thought that could be a novel for me. And I went back home thinking that I would be writing the story of a famous racehorse, and this would be good for me because I could combine my new obsession with my actual, day job. But at the minute that I started to research the story of this horse, I realized that it was about much more than a horse, because the people who were responsible for the success of this horse were black and enslaved. They were the highly skilled black horsemen on whose plundered labor the national obsession of the mid-19th century rested. and that was thoroughbred racing. This was huge in the 19th century. It's hard to imagine now when this is a declining kind of niche interest in this country. This was something that all kinds and classes of people were involved with, from the north and the south, black and white. People had horses. They cared about their horses. They actually raced their own horses on the main streets of most towns in America. Short sprints, that's how we got the American quarter horse, racing over a quarter-mile distance. But what people really cared about were these magnificent thoroughbreds who could race for 4 miles. And we think of the Kentucky Derby as a long race now. This was 3 Kentucky Derbies in length. Oh. So it's not just about speed, it's about strategy, it's about endurance. These horses were strong as well as fast, and there were great rivalries between the best horses. And all of this money and prestige was coming off the backs of enslaved and highly skillful men. They all were men, of course, in those days. And so I realized that this novel was going to go in some directions that I hadn't expected.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I was sort of struck in your afterward. You say that in New York City here, at that time, 3 of the main newspapers, the major newspapers, were devoted to horse racing.
That is right, and that actually made my task of writing about the horse itself much easier, because every hoofbeat this horse took was documented in those 3 newspapers. So I could find out immense amount of material about the horse, about the grooms, the jockeys, and the trainers, the black men who had made this horse so great. Much harder. Much more digging, much more looking in the corners, looking at what is not described and inferring from that.
Yeah. And then also, since we're on this topic of, horses culturally, I mean, so much of the book also revolves around art and horse racing. And also, I mean, here too, that there's an actual sort of a genre, a highly developed genre of painting of horses. And anyway, talk a little bit about that.
Well, so I start out thinking about this novel, and I know that there's this strong historical story of the horse in the Civil War, and then I realized it's also about the Black Horseman. But I want to bring into the story the science at the Smithsonian, because I'm interested in, well, what was that skeleton doing there? How did it get there? What did they use bones for? The scientific work around bones. And so there was going to be a contemporary story as well that would be set in the modern-day Smithsonian Institution. And that would get into the science of bone preparation and study. But when I went to the Smithsonian to learn about osteoprep and to visit the osteoprep lab, which is a ridiculous place, I have to tell you, because it's in, some people here have probably been to some of the great museums on the Mall, and you may know that the Smithsonian is called the Attic of America. But I learned that the attic has an attic. And what you see on the Mall is only 2% of the collections of the Smithsonian. The other 98% of collections are out in a vast campus in Suitland, Maryland. And in these huge storage pods are some of the greatest examples of human art from all over the world. There are scientific specimens representing every known species. There is all kinds of scientific research underway there. And then there's also this funky corner of that campus called the Osteoprep Lab, where there's a lot of high-tech equipment, but the real work is done by bugs. Because for all our scientific advancement, the best way to clean bones is to have bugs eat the flesh off them. So I got to visit the bug room. But while I was there, a curator from the American Art Museum said, we've got a portrait of this horse in our collection. would you like to see it? And I said, of course. So she took me to the study center because it wasn't on display. And I said, did it come to the Smithsonian along with the skeleton? Because it's a 19th century oil painting. And she said, no, it's really unusual. It came as a bequest from a feminist art gallery owner in New York City who is famous in the post-World War II period for her support of the most avant-garde art of the moment. And she was one of Pollock and de Kooning's earliest supporters. She did the first exhibition for Bridget Riley. She coined the term op art. And when she gave a bequest to the Smithsonian, it was edgy contemporary post-war art, except for this one 19th century oil painting of the racehorse Lexington. And so my novelist's imagination got swept away with that. And suddenly I had a 3-stranded novel instead of a 2-stranded one. And so we jump in time from the 1850s to the 1950s in New York, the birth of a new artistic aesthetic. And we also have I wanted to make it as contemporary as I could in Washington, D.C. at the Smithsonian without the complication of COVID. So it stops in 2019. But that's the structure of the novel. But you had a wonderful painting here. Can we throw that back up on the screen, do you think?
Yes.
So this is, when you see it, this is a painting by a Swiss artist called Troy, who became the preeminent equestrian painter of the 19th century. And this is not the horse I'm writing about. This is a different racehorse called Richard Singleton. And the title of the painting is Richard Singleton with Viley's Harry, Charles, and Lou. Now, Viley was Captain Viley, who was the white owner of the racehorse and the enslaver of these men. And this is Harry Lewis, and he was a renowned trainer, and he managed to emancipate himself, and he was a free man when he trained Lexington. But even as a free man, as a black man, he was not allowed to race a horse in his own name. So he trained Lexington, but Lexington had to race under the name of Warfield, who Harry at that point worked for. And then one of these guys, and I'm not sure which one, Lou was Harry's son. And I've given Harry a different son in my novel, Jarrett. And Jarrett is based on the groom of Lexington, who we know lived because of another painting, but we don't have that painting, it's lost. But it's the most famous painting by another equestrian artist, and it is Lexington being led out by Black Jarrett, his groom. And I've never seen it, but it's been described as a most marvelous painting. And I became interested in who this Jarrett was, and I went looking for him in the records of the horse farm on which he worked, and he's there for sure. And after the Emancipation Proclamation, he's getting paid wages. But what it was like to be him, we have no record. So that's where you take the leap of chutzpah and imagination, and you do the research about what life was like for somebody like Jarrett. And then but I'd like to, if it might be a good time to read just this one. So in my contemporary, so once I realized I'm writing about race in the 19th century and I have a contemporary story as well, I can't leave race in the 19th century as if that injustice is something that's over and done with. And these days we don't have to bother our pretty heads about it, because as we know, that is not true. And while I was writing this book, George Floyd was murdered, Ahmaud Arbery was murdered, Breonna Taylor was murdered, many other names. We could say the names all night, and that would be a worthy use of our night to remember all these people who have died unjustly at the hands of this violent system. So there was no way I could not have this storyline from the 19th century echo in the contemporary story as well. And so the vehicle for that is a young man named Theo, who is an art historian, a PhD candidate at Georgetown University, and he becomes intrigued by that very painting. And I'm just going to read a little bit about that.
Oh, now put it back. Yeah.
It's worth looking at this painting in some detail because I just think the portrayal of Harry Lewis in this painting is remarkable. The expression on his face, which is like, "Why are you interrupting my work here?" Anyway, so Theo is in the Smithsonian Study Center, and he has found this painting. The title, Richard Singleton with Bailey's Harry, Charles, and Lou. Theo sat back on his heels and regarded the painting. This man, Bailey, whoever he was, had commissioned a painting that showed off several of his prized possessions, his thoroughbred racehorse, and 3 men he had enslaved. The artist, it seemed, had willingly abetted this braggadocio. A line from Ozymandias wafted through his mind. Something about the artist, well, those passions red that yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And yet, there was no mockery here. As Theo gazed at the painting, he was struck by the individuality of the 3 men. Troy had portrayed them as distinct personalities. They were presences. He had not caricatured them. There was no exaggeration of features. He'd taken minute care with the details of their faces, clothing, bearing. Theo's dissertation was meant to be on depictions of Africans in British art. His working title, Sambo, Othello, and Uncle Tom, Caricature, Exoticization, Subalternization, 1700 to 1900. He planned to write of coon caricatures, Orientalist fantasies, the decorative enslaved servant in ornate livery, proffering fruit or waving a peacock-feathered fan for a white master. His thesis argued that these paintings were never meant to be viewed as portraits of individuals, merely status signifiers of the privilege, wealth, and power of the white sitters. The reality of quotidian black life didn't merit depiction. His argument mirrored Frederick Douglass's caustic essay, arguing that no true portraits of Africans by white artists existed, that white artists couldn't see past their own ingrained stereotype of blackness. Douglass's piece, published in The Liberator, mocked the caricatures that white painters produced, the broad noses, the thick lips, and asked his readers to consider if they'd ever seen in life an actual face that combined all these exaggerated features. But here was a painting that challenged his thesis. In particular, the man in the top hat, the trainer, Theo supposed, had been depicted possessing a dignified authority. He actually looked irritated with the artist who was interrupting his important work. He gazed boldly beyond the painting, meeting the eyes of the viewer with a challenging glare. Theo had never seen a painting depicting an enslaved person that emphasized his authority and agency in this way. And yet, that title, Bailey's Harry, Charles, and Lou. Theo felt whipsawed. Troy may have portrayed these men as individuals, but perhaps only in the same clinical way that he exactly documented the splendid musculature of the thoroughbred. It was impossible not to suspect some equivalence between the men and the horse, valued, no doubt, but living by the will of their enslaver, submitting to the whip. Obedience and docility, valued in a horse, valued in an enslaved human. Both should move only at the command of their owner. Loyalty, muscle, willingness, qualities for a horse, qualities for the enslaved. And while the horse had 2 names, the men had only one. Theo let the resentment rise inside him. Then, as he'd trained himself to do, he crushed it. just as a lump of coal under pressure could become a diamond bit. Theo had learned to turn his anger into something he could use.
Yeah, this is yeah, I mean, this is so central to the whole unfolding of the of the narrative of the work, and also this becomes a continuing point of tension, right? Because later, he's struggling with his doctoral advisor, who is pretty much
she's pissed at him that he's focusing on these two white artists, and she thinks that it's a very niche topic, and she refutes the fact that he's seeing what he believes he is seeing, because she says it can't be valid.
Right. And then he digs into this. I mean, that's So, that's why I think that it's really quite remarkable how you're weaving the art and history and science, right? The science of the skeletals. I learned what the word articulation means in
putting together bones, yes.
Right, in the osteological
yeah.
realm. So I think that there's a lot of sleuth work that's going on, and then there's sort of the discoveries that take place. I just wanted to kind of we're looking at this horse, and you began in talking about the role of the Black Horseman. But one of the as you bring to life very vividly the groom trainer Jared, there's a very special relationship between him and the horse. And I just, one of the things that struck me was, it's almost an intimacy between Jared and a kind of a share in the realm of, at one point...
It's a love story.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, one of the themes of the book is our relationship with animals, because it's something that is very important to me and has been my entire life, but I think it's very important on a planetary basis also, because if we don't start taking care of other species on this planet in a very serious way, I mean, we're living in an era of mass extinction, and soon it's going to get very lonely here, and then we'll be gone, because we can't do it without the rich web of life. And I don't know, I remember when I was growing up, in summer, the insects would be swarming the screens. How long has it been since anybody's seen insects swarming the screens? Insect populations are crashing. It's just another way that, one of the concerns of this place is the effects of capitalism, and I think we feel the effects of capitalism on climate, on biodiversity. And so I was hoping, by describing the vividness that can exist between a human and a particular animal, maybe, I can awaken some feeling for all species. I am an equal opportunity species lover. My family will tell you that it's very hard to get me to persecute a rat.
Well, we might have a sharp struggle on that one. But I really appreciate what you're saying, because, we do, the revolution we're about, we have to become caretakers of the planet. This is, and it can't happen under this system. And I just wanted to come back to what you were saying, the love, but there's something else, not a but, there's something else that, there's a question of communication. Like there's sort of, there are words and there are orders, and yet between Jared and the horse, I think you used the phrase gestural.
Oh, well, horses communicate very vividly, and they do it without words, but they get their point across very clearly once you learn the language of horses. And I didn't know it when I got my horse. I got this horse. This horse was not from close by. This horse was from Mexico. And this horse had been a ranch horse on the Altiplano, and after the horse had rested from the journey, I took this horse out alone on a trail ride into the deep, thick woods of Massachusetts. And this is a horse who's never been in woods. So there's a couple of things that you shouldn't do, which is go alone on a trail ride when you're not a very experienced rider with a brand new horse and the horse is not familiar with the territory. So the horse's ears are spinning. The horse's nostrils are billowing. And I didn't know to read those signs. And it was a miracle that we got home. And I think the only reason we did was because I was in such a euphoric state about riding this horse. So the horse is getting my euphoria and thinking, if this stupid bitch thinks we're safe, it must be all right.
Yeah. You know, this tradition of black people, and you know, this is something that you're excavating here. Not that I mean, others have written about this, but you're bringing it, you know, into front and center into the into the novel. And I wanted to ask, did you see the film Concrete Cowboy?
I have not, but I know the journalism that it's based on.
Right. I mean, you know, reading the book, I was sort of evoked that film. Can people just who's seen that film? Yeah, but it's about black horsemen in Philadelphia and women, black horsemen and women in Philadelphia today. There are black stables right in the middle of the urban habitat. And this is sort of, you know, I was thinking about, you know, when I was reading the novel and all the work you did, and then the role that was played. This is a legacy that's been passed on, and I just, you know, it's something that it's sort of strikes people as counterfactual when they first encounter it. But you've kind of put this, you know, before people, and there's a rich history here. But I thought that
there is a rich history here, and then, you know, so what, you know. In the antebellum period, these men mostly were enslaved, but they had a kind of extraordinary status within that brutal system because what they did was so extremely valuable to the thoroughbred owners, because so much of their wealth and prestige rested on these horses. And it's something that you notice in the letters between the owners that was really revelatory to me, because mostly when these white guys are talking about their enslaved people, they speak very disparagingly, they're mocking, they're, you know, not about the horsemen, they're deferential. It's, Hark says we should do this, and I will ask Charles about that.
Right.
You know, and so it's quite a unique position, and the jockeys also were often noted in the press by name and given credit for their achievement. And then Reconstruction happens, and then the reaction to Reconstruction. And all of these talented, experienced horsemen are pushed out of the business.
Yeah.
And for the jockeys, it was done in a life-threatening way. The white jockeys ganged up on them and made it unsafe for them to race. And so people either had to go abroad to pursue their livelihood, or they died in penury. And the trainers were pushed down in the hierarchy and became like in charge of the carriage horses or just, you know, stable hands. And that's what you see on the racetrack today, an incredibly vibrant talent pool of black and immigrant labor, poorly paid, dangerous work, not getting any of the credit that they deserve.
Yeah. You know, I was going to ask Connie, I have other questions and comments, but I'd like to ask Connie if she had something that she wanted to...
one thing I...
You can take your, when you talk.
Oh, yeah. I was very struck by, speaking of these owners and so on, and the care that you take and the sort of really interesting excavation that you make of the kind of, what we call the mode of production here, you know, that basically that this was, this was in a slave society, but then there were also these people that came from the north, like Tenbrook, who, is a real person, right?
Tenbrook is a real person.
Yeah, who embodied capital, and would do anything, everything from outbidding the father of Jarrett, to who wanted to free him, right? To running horses to death, to betting against his own horses, Anyway, that was just an example of how that, capitalism, lived side by side with slavery.
It was intensely capitalistic. It was unfettered capitalism. And, so some of the horse owners were more paternalistic capitalists, and some of them were just cutthroat. And Tenbrook was an entrepreneur. He was, he had come from wealth in New York. He was from a New York Dutch family, but he got into disgrace at West Point, and he'd gone south as a riverboat gambler and made his money off gambling. What could be more capitalistic than that? And then invested in racehorses and racetracks, and was very successful until he wasn't, and he died in absolute abject poverty.
Yeah, at one point in relation to that, you talk about how there were a jockey who was a free laborer, and then there's a jockey who's enslaved. And the same figure that we're talking about says, well, if the distinction.
This is my novelist's imagination working.
Right.
But he's thinking, well, why would I be responsible for if there's an accident, I'm stuck with this guy. I still have to feed him and maintain him. So
right.
But it's interesting because it was a much more it was a much more integrated scene than I had imagined, because white jockeys and black jockeys raced together, and there was mutual respect between the jockeys because they know how hard this is. And at the track, blacks and whites mingled freely. So, it was not a Jim Crow situation. That came much later. There were two things I have to say that struck me when I was reading, sort of your back notes and then go back to the novel. One was that this was, a shared experience relative to the, to the hierarchical and highly oppressive, caste system that existed under slavery. But this was a shared experience of black and white people. And the other thing, and then it goes, and then segregation, Jim Crow, post-Reconstruction. And that then continues through like the 1950s. Well, you could say it's only now just starting to be addressed.
But the other thing I wanted to say that comes out is the stopwatch.
The stopwatch, So we had the mass-produced stopwatch because there was such enthusiasm about the competition between Lexington and his main rival horse that people wanted to be able to clock the times themselves. So capitalism came up with the mass-produced stopwatch.
The cult of the stopwatch. You learn so much. I'm wondering if you could just, we don't want to, here at Revolution Books, we're very circumspect about spoilers and, and letting people, work with the novel, right? But I'm wondering if you could just give us, kind of a panorama of the cast of some of the cast of characters. Yeah. Okay.
Well, in the 19th century, the central character is Jarrett, and Jarrett and Lexington travel together through a number of experiences, and this tracks the actual career of the horse, which we know, and I can assume that Jarrett is with him because in the letters it says we will be moving Lexington from Natchez to New Orleans in the care of the darky. And we know that there was a man named Jarrett who was the groom, so I'm assuming that's who was moving the horse, and so that's how I've written it. So Jarrett is the central, but there are a lot of interesting white characters. My favorite white character from that period is a historical figure called Cassius Clay, which is a name we all know, but not because of Cassius Clay necessarily. Of course, Muhammad Ali, that was his given name before he changed it. And Cassius Clay was a scion of the largest slaveholding family in Kentucky, but he became an emancipationist under the influence of William Lloyd Garrison. He heard William Lloyd Garrison speaking, but he didn't agree with abolition. He wanted to see this achieved through legislation. So that's the difference between an abolitionist and an emancipationist. But needless to say, he freed all the slaves that he inherited, and then he founded a newspaper called The True American, which argued against slavery on all kinds of grounds. Economic grounds. He said it was stifling the South because, they had enslaved human beings, whereas the North had enslaved the elements of water for the mills and, energy, and that's why all the material goods that were for sale in the South were produced in the North. So he had all these arguments, and of course they went over like a lead balloon in Kentucky, and so there were 3 assassination attempts on this guy. And one of them, somebody actually shot him in the chest. And he came back at the guy with a Bowie knife and eviscerated his assailant. So, and he lived to a very ripe old age. And he was quite a character. But he turns out to be connected to the horse Lexington through marriage. So he's in the book. Then in the contemporary period, there are 2 protagonists. There's the woman who works at the Smithsonian. She's a zoologist and an osteoprep specialist, and she runs the osteoprep lab. And because of her interest in the horse's skeleton, she comes into contact with Theo, who is exploring the artists who painted the horse. And so there's a kind of an awkward dance around their relationship. They have this shared interest, but not a whole lot else in common. But gradually that changes. And then there is the gallerist Martha Jackson, who was the extraordinary pioneer in New York. So I think that's the main cast. Yeah.
My last question, and then we're going to open it up to the audience, and we'll come back to more. But you've talked about some of the main characters, and 2 of them, central characters, are black men.
Yeah.
Jared and Theo, the art historian. And they're very richly, depicted, and you get inside their heads. and how did you see the challenge of writing, and portraying these people who are not necessarily, they're not proximate to your direct experience, and yet you've brought them to life and with tremendous both empathy and depth. So I just want to know how you kind of rose to that challenge.
Well, I was terrified, frankly. I was not unaware of the discourse. I was not out of sympathy with the discourse either that says, what are you, a white woman, doing writing Black lives? And honestly, there was a moment when I was going to abandon the book, when I realized what I would have to do to tell the story. I had a little moment of being a chicken, because I didn't want to end up in a Twitter firestorm. But I thought the story was worth telling, and then there was a moment when I thought, well, I could just center it on the white owners. They're very interesting characters. I could do that. And I thought, absolutely not. That would be unconscionable, because that would be further erasing the contribution of the Black Horseman. So if you're going to tell the story of the horse, you have to tell the story of the Black Horseman, and you have to center them because they were central. Right. And you have to acknowledge their expertise, and you have to acknowledge that that was plundered and used to create wealth and prestige for white society. And So I kind of plunged in to try and do that as best I could, and to be honest, resting on the work of Black historians who have gone so deeply into the scholarship of enslavement. Excuse me. And then having committed to that, I've got to bring it into the contemporary world as well. And so, you know, that there you're on really thin ice, because this is people's actual lived experience in the present day. So I really relied on the generosity and patience of Black friends who were kind enough to sit with me and walk through some situations that I was imagining, and were able to, and willing, you know, to set me right when I was on the wrong track and put a lot of red lines through things. And, you know, but, you know, it's lucky I live on Martha's Vineyard. There's been a vibrant Black community there for more than 100 years. And I've lived there getting on 20-something years now. And luckily, I've had time to get to know people very well. And one thing I've learned, and it's a privileged community, there's no bones about that. But one thing I've learned is there's no amount of education or wealth or even celebrity is going to keep you safe. Because every single friend I have has had an experience of either terror or humiliation. And I think everybody in this room will remember one of the most famous examples of this was my neighbor in the summer is Henry Louis Gates. And I think we all remember the terrible occasion when he was dragged off his front porch in handcuffs within 3 minutes of the policeman arriving, who had been called by the racist across the road, who said a Black man is breaking into a house. So Skip Gates is in handcuffs in a squad car for the crime of opening his own front door. And that's not, I mean, another friend who's a very celebrated screenwriter, dragged out of her car and made to sit in a filthy gutter because a racist cop didn't think a Black woman would have such a nice car. And it goes on and on and on. So, you know, I was able to draw on these experiences that people were generous enough to share. And, you know, I know it gets on Black people's last nerve to have to explain their own racism to white people, but, you know, they took the time and helped me. And to the extent that anything is right, it's because of that generosity.
Well, right on. Yeah. I want to open it up to the audience now. If people have, you know, any questions, observations, and again, I want to remind people that, you know, you can get the book and have Geraldine sign it for you. So let's see. Can I just see a show of hands of people that would like to ask a question or comment, just so I can see how we're going to navigate? I see one. Okay.
There was a gentleman down the back who had a question earlier. We may have already answered it, but...
Well, we'll see. Okay, so let's start up here.
I will say I have read, I think, just about every one of your books.
Wait, is the mic on?
Yeah, it's on.
People hear her?
I just want to say I think I've read all of your books, and I've loved every one of them. But I just wanted to say something about the relationship of the intensity, the very intimate relationship of Jared and the horse, and how it, I mean, you are drawn in immediately into this story, and the particularity of it, and the situation, and understanding that in terms of it's 1850, and what the relations are there. And then at a certain point, and this is, you know, perhaps a little bit of a spoiler, he's taken away from the horse and put in the fields. And I just thought that was a way of situating that whole particular intimate skill and privilege of the, you know, the stables and the horse racing in the larger context of the 1850s, and what on that same plantation, that what people endured and were, the incredible privation and labor and physical torment that people went through. But it was done in such a way, in a very organic way, so to speak. Where it wasn't just, well, you have to understand this is just a small picture of society. There's really this larger picture, but I think it really served to then make you step back and see the entirety of the whole system, which in a very intense and living way.
There's so much to excavate, and luckily there's just absolutely wonderful history being done, work all the time. I was just reading a PhD dissertation that touches on the plight of people on the sugar plantations, which was another level of horror.
Yeah.
Absolute, abject horror. People were just used up within a few years through this grueling process. For what? For a sweet taste in the mouth of some British lord and lady, So, yeah. And, and then we have to reflect on what the slave labor conditions are in the factories that we don't see now in the cotton plantations where the Uyghurs are being put to work in China, or where, in Vietnam for the clothes that we wear on our backs that we have no idea.
And the mines in the Congo.
Yeah, and the mines I'm very proud of having an electric car, except I have no idea what labor went into getting those rare earth minerals for that battery. So,
Others? Up, right here.
We've knocked you all into a stupor.
Just on this,
Put it closer to
the thing that you just brought up, what happened to Jared, he changed, that experience of being forced into this brutal, horrific, cotton picking, with where he had he wasn't just that it was horrible physically, but, suddenly he was no one. He was just a hand, literally a talking tool, that's what they call it. And I wanted to, I think that this runs through, and I'll jump here because in the present day, the people change in this book. They transform, and there's not, there's no, predetermined way in which that's going to happen, and I felt like, in particular, the relationship between the two, Jess and Theo, was one of people confronting, their all the bullshit that
those are the contemporary characters.
And then having to struggle through, well, what matters here, and they were exploring something so fun, so important together, but they had to transform to even be, and it's sort of a relationship you'd wish you could have, in a certain sense, that people could come together in the process of understanding the world deeply. And it was a mystery too. I mean, I must tell readers who haven't read this yet, this is a thriller in a way, But part of it is what's thrilling is seeing people confront, the horrors of this society, or even just the petty racist shit or whatever, and confronting it and then dealing with it, and then in this case, that couple, they actually came together, and it was quite a beautiful romance, if you want to call it that, of coming together of two people, sort of paralleling the Jared and Lexington in a funny way, Anyway, those are just some observations.
Yeah, well, I think, this is where I think I benefit from all those years of being a foreign correspondent and seeing people. I felt like the job was really to document the actual consequences of foreign policy decisions in ordinary people's lives. Huh. And while you're doing that, you thrust into somebody's life at a moment of great crisis and tension. And I saw people change in the most extraordinary way and in quite short periods of time. And I'll just give you two examples. One was a young Kurdish woman who had really grown up thinking that her life was going to be entirely domestic, that, you know, you get married, you raise your kids, your husband's out in the world. Well, her husband was arrested as a dissident, and then suddenly it's the aftermath of the Kurdish uprising after the Gulf War, and Saddam Hussein gets permission from George Bush to use his helicopter gunships. They come in to crush the Kurdish uprising, and she's there with the kids, and the husband's gone, and she's the one who has to lead the family to safety over the mined mountain passes into Turkey. And so you see this woman step into that role. Then in Eritrea, it was a woman who had grown up in a rural village that was so conservative. They still had a menses tent where women of the village had to go when they had their period, and where women were told that they could not address their husband until the husband addressed them first. She grew up in that environment, and when I met her, she was leading a platoon of troops in the assault on Asmara, and all these men were following her. So how do you get from A to Z like that? But having seen it actually happen in real life, it gives me a lot more confidence as a novelist to allow my characters to change.
And I think it's interesting also you're foregrounding that relationship. And one, I want to say, just it's the first time I've seen a depiction of how someone with osteological skills, right, that becomes an erotic element in the novel. I'm not going to say anything more, okay? But on a serious note, that relationship is such a precious one, and you really are with them and rooting for them, but you don't romanticize
The difficulties.
the relationship, the difficulties, nor is it some kind of utopian refuge from the larger world. And that's, you know, people should read the novel.
It's going to be real work. It's going to be work, yeah.
And the world is constantly intruding, this society and its unrelenting racism. It's really remarkable. Other questions? Is Kevin here? I thought Kevin, I was told on
Don't put
good
him
authority,
on the spot.
I was told on good authority that you had some thoughts or a question about the book. He's someone that works.
Well, actually, Connie very well voiced a lot of what I was thinking about. The character Tenbrook I've found to be fascinating. There's a passage where he does a monologue.
Can we see you? Are we allowed to see you?
Oh, you're allowed to see him. He does a monologue which is like a personification of capital in life that expresses how all these social relations are bound up with the way everything is done, the way people work together and live together, and what everything's worth on. I got a tremendous lot out of that book. And in fact, just congratulate you for going directly up against all this bullshit that tells people they got to be in their own lane. We need everybody fighting for this and doing everything they can to bring us forward.
Well, thank you,
and
Kevin.
putting everything they have into it.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. I think, you know, I've said before, and, you know, but I think it's important. I don't think any attempt at empathy should be despised, even if it's imperfect. Because imperfect empathy is better than no empathy at all, and we need more empathy, not less.
Yes.
Well, I'm happy to talk one-on-one if people want to hang around.
This has been good. We've had a robust 45 minutes. Mm-hmm. And I want to make a few announcements, all right? And invite everyone to stay behind and talk with Geraldine. So I want to let people know about some of the upcoming events here at the bookstore. This
Thursday at 7 p.m., we're having an emergency forum on the fascist judge's ruling to outlaw the abortion pill. Yeah. Okay? That's going to be this Thursday. And we're going to invite everyone here back. We're going to, call on, people that are experts in the field, whether they're, medical people, people that are out, at abortion clinics. And we want women and we want everyone who's outraged by this and who really recognizes that we have to, this cannot be allowed to stand.
Yeah.
Okay? This illegitimate, unjust ruling cannot be allowed to stand. And let's be crystal clear. Forced motherhood, which is what this is about, equals female enslavement. It's just that clear and just that ominous. Okay? That's the stakes of this. It's one step further to a full-blown theocracy in this society. Okay? And so that's this Thursday. And if you want to be involved in this, Jane here is going to raise her hand and show her face. And, we say that unleash the fury of women as a mighty force for revolution. And, some of the stories that Geraldine was just talking about, how this, all over the world, globally, the oppression of women is intensifying. All right? So this Thursday, and we've also seen, as it intensifies, tremendous examples of women rising up in this same period, whether it's in Iran, right, in Latin America, in Poland, where people have risen up against restrictions on abortion. So this Thursday, be there.
Wisconsin.
And Wisconsin. Right. Then, next Wednesday, we're going to have there's a book that just got released called Rikers, an Oral History. And, there's practically no one in this city whose life, directly or indirectly, with 1 or 2 degrees of separation, has not been impacted by Rikers, right? Which is like one of the most horrific penal colonies in this country. All right, so they're coming. The authors are coming to present the book, and we are going to also have, and the authors are Graham Raymond and Reuven Blau, and a former detainee, Eddie Rosario, who's profiled in the book, will be coming here as well. Okay, and throughout the month of April, leading towards May Day 2023, an internationalist May 1st, 2023, take to the streets. We refuse to accept this system's future. Now is the time to get organized for a real revolution. We're going to have a May Day that is commensurate with that call. And we are having meetings to organize for it. And again, I invite you to come out and throw your ideas, into the pool and be part of organizing for this manifestation on May Day. This is against the backdrop of the escalating moves towards world war between the U.S. and Russia over the Ukraine, the U.S. ramping up its threats against China, and the real danger of nuclear war. I mean, this is where things are headed right now. We need to make a revolution. Now is the time to get organized. Now is the time to get organized for a real revolution. So that's May 1st, the internationalist expression on that day. That's a Monday, right? Okay. Then I want to again call upon people to find out more about the bookstore, to speak with our staff, make a donation to the store, okay? We can't survive without your support, without your involvement, without your creativity. So you've ideas for other author programs? Let us know. ways in which we can spread the reach of this bookstore, let us know and be part of that. Okay? And, you know, we talked today about, you know, this book and racism that is inextricably bound up, not just with the founding of this country, white supremacy. Yes, it's poured into the foundations of this country, this capitalist and then capitalist imperialist system. Bob Avakian has analyzed this, but it is part of the structure and functioning of this system. And there can be no revolution worth making that does not take the oppression of black people and the uprooting of that oppression and unleashing the incredible determination of black people to be free of this, that does not take that as a central fact. There's no revolution worth making that doesn't proceed from that. And Bob Avakian has written extensively on this, and there's a pamphlet, you know, which, you know, people should get a hold of, and our staff will call it to people's attention. Bob Avakian on the liberation of black people and the revolution that we need, okay? So I commend that to people's attention, and right now, I want all of us to give Geraldine a warm round of applause. And, you know, I was so choked up reading the book, you know, and going over it again today. I was saying, I hope I can hold myself together here. And, but it was really so wonderful to be here with you, to hear you, and to share in the joy and the message of this novel. So we'll call it a night and come back.
Thank you. Thank you very much.